Buongiorno, my loves. I am Carmen Westbrook. I am the CEO and one of the partners of Aina Giving, a socially responsible servant leadership company. We do leadership development all over the world, and we use our copyrighted archetypal leadership model. And we also have a special program where for every leadership development training that is bought from Aina Giving, we give one to a vulnerable population in need to develop their own self-leadership and their economic independence. So today we're going to talk about assumptions. Why are assumptions important? So why do we even look at assumptions? So in every training that we do, we always have something where we talk about assumptions. And this is because assumptions are basically the stories that we hold in our heads about the world. This is a really, really important practice for us to get into about what are those assumptions that we're holding and just being able to be consciously aware of them. Because as leaders, as we're stepping out into the world and taking on some more leadership roles, we need to be aware of not only our impact on others, we also need to be aware of their impact on us. And a lot of times those impacts actually end up coming to us unconsciously. So we make sure that we work on people on conscious leadership, which is bringing up those things that are kind of in our subconscious to that conscious level. And assumption breaking practices are one of the really powerful tools that we use to do that. So we know that our brain is kind of like an iceberg. So it's about 90% of it is this subconscious level. And then 10% is that part that's peeking out over the top. And that's our conscious level. Our assumptions live in our subconscious, and it's part of our jobs to really unearth those and bring them up to that consciousness level as much as we can so that we can kind of inspect them and see what's going on there. This helps us to be a much more powerful leader in any of the groups that we're leading, and it's especially powerful for those socially responsible servant leaders, because those are the people that are going out into the world and really working with and interacting with very, very diverse groups of people. And as those leaders are going out and doing this, it's imperative for them to realize the assumptions that they might be holding about the people that are around them, and also maybe some of the assumptions that those people might be holding about themselves as a leader. So, what are assumptions? One of my favorite things to think about with assumptions, and that kind of the way that I describe it to people, is that assumptions are kind of like a library. So if we think about our brain as this great big library that we have inside of ourselves, we've got all of this information. Assumptions are kind of like the books that are there on the library shelves. So these might be the books that we've even read already and that we feel like we know the answers to, but we haven't filed away up there on our shelves for reference. Assumptions are really, really, really important. We need to have assumptions. They are a crucial, crucial aspects of our lives, because without assumptions, we would not be able to get out of bed in the morning. So when I wake up in the morning, I make an assumption that the floor is going to be there when I put my feet down on the floor. That assumption, as we know from quantum physics now, is not necessarily true. However, I need to hold that assumption in my head in order to progress with my life, as I need to get up and get my kids ready for school. I need to get myself ready for the day. I need to get prepared to go out and give workshops and work with my team and go, help out in the areas that we're being called to help out in. And that is a really, really important foundation for my life, is that the floor is going to be there when I put my foot down. Now, if I were a quantum physicist, that might not be an assumption that I would want to hold in my head. In fact, I might do better if I just stayed in my bed all day and thought about that specific assumption and how that might not be acting out in the world. However, because my life is not usually the life of a quantum physicist, that's an assumption that I hold inside of my head so that I can get out of bed every morning and just continue on in my day. What's important to remember is assumptions are essential and they are important, And then there are also times that we're being called to look at those assumptions and think about them. So, what is an assumption? What is the actual definition of an assumption? So, the way that assumptions are defined by the dictionary are assumptions are a thing that is accepted as true or certain to happen. Okay, so it's basically just something that we accept to be true or certain to happen. And a really important caveat to this is that it's a thing that is accepted as true or certain to happen without proof. So that's an important part of the assumption. All right, so we need to hold that in our heads, is that we kind of accept these things as true, or we expect them to happen, but we don't have any proof behind that. So for all of us that know the scientific method, we actually realize that anything that we do out in the world, we have some amount of proof for it, but we don't have 100% proof for it. So scientists always say that we can't actually prove anything. We can just prove that up until now, it's kind of been like that. So we make assumptions all the time. We assume that the air is going to be around us and we can breathe in all the time. And we make those kind of guesses about this is going to actually be something that's true, and we don't actually have all the proof behind it. Now, again, remember, we have to do this. This is something that we have to do. We learn to do this as a really, really, really little baby. We have to do this. Otherwise, we would not be able to move forward with our lives. Otherwise, we would just be sitting there crying and waiting for somebody to just kind of handle it all for us. So assumptions are an essential part of our lives. What we want to do is we want to unearth some of those assumptions now. All right, another really important part of assumptions is that they have another side of their definition. So it's not only that they are a thing that is accepted as true or certain to happen without proof. They are also defined as the action of taking on power or responsibility. Isn't that fascinating? Those two put together are a very fascinating way of looking at this thing that we do inside of our heads that we call assumptions. So when we kind of take something as being true, or we assume that it is going to actually, we accept it as true and it's kind of certain to happen, we're also taking on some kind of power or responsibility for ourselves. Why is that important? Because we need to understand that as leaders, as people going out in the world, that we are just in every moment of our lives taking on some kind of power and responsibility onto ourselves. And it can be kind of a scary place to be in once we start realizing, oh my goodness, I have so much responsibility in this place. It's also a very liberating place for us to be, because we realize that we have the power and the responsibility to go out and make the changes, any changes that we want to make. And that really being aware of those assumptions and what we are assuming is one of the key components to this. So when we're going out into the world and when we're starting to kind of step into our leadership roles, we need to start being aware of what are those assumptions that we're holding for all the people around us, okay? And also, what are the assumptions that they are holding for us? So both of those things are really, really important, and they're important to draw up, and it's important to not take it personally. So if we kind of start getting judgmental about ourselves, about this assumptioning thing that we do, we can go into this downward spiral and it can get really messy and there can be no progress then. So we don't want to do that. We simply want to draw conscious awareness to almost like put a flashlight on it and say, look, I was holding an assumption about that. I didn't even know that I was doing that. It's okay. I needed to hold that assumption in order to get out of the bed for the past all of the years of my life. However, apparently that assumption right now is being asked to be re-looked at in this moment. And that is where it starts getting fun, in my opinion. So when we start being called to be re-looking at these assumptions that we have in our heads, the first thing that can happen is that the world can start looking pretty freaky. We can start feeling like we are in this quantum black hole, and all of the things that we sort of held to be true about this world, it can feel like they're actually being called into extreme question. So we can kind of start getting into this place of almost lostness, and not feeling very stable in who we are. Okay, so it's important to realize that when we're doing some assumption breaking practices, this is not calling into question who you are as a person. It's not calling into question your very being. All it is it's calling into question maybe some of the stories that we've told about some of the things around us. And that's a very, very, very important distinction, because it allows us to go forward with our assumption breaking practices. And instead of being kind of freaked out by going in the black hole of everything, we can look at it more as this possibility where we're pulling down some of those books that were up there on our shelves that we had stored away for good reason. We'd read them and we had put them up on the shelves for good reason. And we are going to start pulling them off of those shelves and start thumbing through it and looking at those assumptions and maybe rereading them, especially with friends. It's very helpful to do this with somebody else in our lives that we trust, because they'll help us to say, maybe that's the one that we want to break. Maybe that's a box that we're looking at that we want to reformulate now and put back up on the shelf later on. Maybe we want to rewrite this part of the story, and then we can put it on the shelf and go forward. But at this point, it's important for us to look at how we are rewriting the story. This is an essential aspect of any growth process that we might be going through. We have to start rewriting those stories that we've held as absolutely true in our lives, because growth demands a rewriting of that story in some way. So remember, in order to make this kind of not feel scary and not feel like it's actually attacking who our being is as a person, think of it just more as there's an invitation to take one of those boxes down from the shelf, maybe one of those books down from the shelf, and reread it, and maybe write some of the new stuff that you've discovered through whatever process into that part of it, and maybe cross out some of that old stuff that seems to maybe not fit so much anymore. Okay, so another thing that can happen as we're going through and doing assumptions is we can start feeling pretty exhausted. So we can be that college student that's in the library that's actually sleeping in the library because it was so much assumption breaking. So we've all been there. We've all been that student who's been exhausted from sleeping through everything and learning all of the things. And that's another place that we don't really want to go to. So we need to calibrate as we're breaking these assumptions about the world, as we're rewriting maybe some of our own news stories about things. We need to be cognizant of how much we're doing all at the same time, because we don't want to read the whole library all at the same time. It can get kind of crazy if we attempt to take that on. So we're going to guide you through some exercises for how to go about even breaking some of these assumptions, and how to break assumptions about ourselves and to break assumptions about other people. And also, when we're in groups and we're working together, how we can do this with each other in support of each other and have it be this really wonderful, safe, growing environment for all of us. Because the really best, most amazing thing about assumptions is that assumptions are the things that help us to discover the new world. They help us to discover all of those amazing things that are out there that we might just not have known before. It's a wonderful, wonderful learning environment when we get to this place where we can start breaking down some of those assumptions, start calling them up to our consciousness level, and maybe re-inspecting them and reading those books again, because we discover so many more things about the world that we might not have known. It's a really fun place to be, and it's an integral part of any growth process, any leadership training or development that we take people through. It always includes some kind of assumption breaking practice, and it's always essential as we're going and working with diverse groups and working in service to people that might be very different from us, in service with people that might be very different from us, and thinking about maybe how they're actually also helping us too in this situation, because it's an assumption to think that we're only giving and we're not actually receiving something in the process too. So to kind of wrap it all up, here are some key questions to hold in our minds as we're thinking about these assumptions and going forward with this assumption breaking practice. In our next meeting, we will talk about assumptions and how we are holding those assumptions, and we'll go through a couple of practices for it. So you don't need to kind of figure this all out on your own right now. We'll help take you through that. In the meantime, while you're kind of prepping yourself for this place, maybe think about a couple of key questions, because this will help guide us as we're going through it. So some key questions to think about as we are looking at assumptions. The first one is, what do I think is obvious? So one of the things that I remember the very first time that I was trained on how to do some assumption breaking practices was one of my leadership developers up at the front of the room said, you know, what do you guys all assume about me? And I looked at her and I said, I assume that you're straight. That to me, it felt very obvious about her. But it was completely an assumption. I have no idea. I mean, I have no idea. I don't even know now if that was true or not. It felt like a very obvious sort of thing for me. So the next one is, what do I think is fact? So that's the kind of the floor is going to be there for me when I wake up in the morning. A lot of us assume that those are facts, and it's good to start calling those up and say, what is that? That's fact. The next one is, what do I think is clear? So if we feel like something has been really explained to us clearly throughout our lives, we can say, well, but it's clear that it's just going to be this way, because we feel that that's a clear understanding of that. Okay, and so we want to look at that and kind of examine that and say, well, I feel like this is clear, but maybe it's not. It's an assumption. And then the last one is very interesting, and it is, what do I think is necessary? So thinking about what we think is necessary in the system. These are all really great assumption breaking practices, questions to give to ourselves as we're going through and doing these assumption breaking practices. Those are the 4 that I will give for you right now to start getting yourself prepped and ready to go into our next meeting. Looking forward to seeing you all there, and looking forward to breaking out of some of those molds that we've kept in our heads up until now, and not going that like freaky circle thing, but more going to that fun place where we're learning and exploring and discovering new places. All right. Much love to you all, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.